The barn was quieter than it should have been for Christmas week. Thomas stood just inside the doorway, his breath rising in slow clouds, working gloves clenched in his hands like a habit he hadn't yet learned to release. Outside, the farmhouse glowed with strings of Christmas lights, white, steady, carefully placed by neighbors who believed brightness was proof of blessing. Inside the barn, there was only shadow, hay dust, and the shallow, uneven breathing of the old mule lying on its side. The animal's name was Grace. She had pulled Thomas's plow for years without complaint, her strength steady, her pace consistent. But now her flank barely moved, and one dark eye watched him with a stillness that carried more weight than panic ever could. Animals sense things before men did: storms, shifts in wind, trouble that no decoration could keep away. Thomas knelt, the cold biting through his jeans, and rested a hand on her neck. The warmth was still there, but weaker. He had prayed earlier that morning, quietly, without words that demanded answers. Still, standing there now, humility pressed heavier than fear. He realized how little control he truly had. Beyond the barn, laughter drifted from the road. A pickup passed, its headlights flashing against the single, strong fence line that marked Thomas's land. Everyone else seemed ready for celebration. He felt only responsibility. Leadership, he had learned, wasn't proven when things were bright and easy. It was revealed in dim places, when no one was watching, when integrity required kneeling instead of standing tall. His long-term vision for the farm, stability, stewardship, consistency, felt fragile in that moment, like frost on winter boards. He reached for the lantern hanging by the door, its light soft and honest, nothing like the sharp sparkle outside. As it flickered to life, Thomas noticed the wide, curved path beyond the barn disappearing into mist. Direction wasn't always obvious. Sometimes clarity came only after choosing to stay. He bowed his head, not in despair, but in restraint. Gratitude and worry mixed quietly in his chest. This wasn't about Christmas lights. This was about humility, but it didn't start there. We must go back a little in time. If this story speaks to your heart and you seek wisdom, purpose, and quiet strength, subscribe to the channel and walk this path of reflection with us. 3 months earlier, autumn still lingered gently over the land. Thomas woke before sunrise, as he always did, when the world was quiet enough to hear its own intentions. The farmhouse was still, his wife Margaret asleep beneath a quilt her mother had sewn decades ago. He moved carefully, not out of fear of waking her, but out of respect. Consistency, he believed, began with small disciplines practiced faithfully. Outside, the air carried the scent of damp leaves and turned soil. A thin mist hovered over the pasture, softening the edges of the wide, curved path that led from the house to the barn. That path had been worn slowly over years, by boots, hooves, and decisions repeated until they became direction. Thomas paused near the old oak tree at the edge of the field. Its trunk was thick, scarred by time, but unshaken. His father had planted it the year Thomas was born. Legacy didn't rush, his father used to say. It stood. Purpose had once been clear to Thomas. Not grand, not loud, but steady. Steward the land, care for what was entrusted, lead his household with integrity, build something that would last longer than his own strength. That clarity had guided him through lean seasons and quiet victories alike. Grace, the mule, lifted her head as he approached, ears flicking at the sound of his steps. She was older now, slower but reliable. Thomas ran a hand along the rope coiled neatly on the fence post, a simple tool of discipline, worn smooth by years of use. Discipline without anger, guidance without force. That was how his father had taught him to work animals. It was also how he tried to live. The days followed a rhythm Thomas trusted: feed, repair, walk the fence line. He took pride in boundaries well kept, not because they were restrictive, but because they protected what mattered. Each repaired post felt like an act of stewardship, each straightened wire an affirmation of responsibility. Yet even then, beneath the steady routine, something subtle had begun to shift. At the edge of his awareness, clarity sometimes slipped like frost beneath his boots. Margaret noticed it first. She mentioned how he lingered longer at the table, staring past his coffee, how his long-term vision for the farm felt heavier than before, less hopeful, more calculated. "You've been carrying a lot quietly," she said one evening, her voice calm, not accusing. Thomas had nodded, unsure how to explain it. Discipline was still there, work was still done, but direction, true focus, required more than effort. It required trust, and trust was harder when outcomes felt uncertain. That night, standing by the fence line as the sun dipped low, Thomas whispered a quiet prayer, not for success, but for clarity. The mist lifted slowly from the field, revealing the path once more. He didn't know then how soon that prayer would be tested. Thomas had never dreamed of more land, newer equipment, or recognition in town. His vision was quieter than that. He wanted the farm to remain steady long after his hands could no longer manage the rope or lift the feed sacks. He wanted his work to teach something, to leave behind a sense of order, responsibility, and care that others could feel the moment they stepped onto the soil. Long-term purpose, to him, was not expansion. It was preservation. On Sunday mornings, after the week's labor had settled into his bones, Thomas often walked alone along the wide, curved path that bordered the pasture. The horizon would glow softly, not dramatic, but certain. That light always felt like a promise, made without words. One morning, he stopped near the old oak tree and rested his palm against its bark. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. This was not a performative prayer. It was the kind spoken inward, shaped more by listening than asking. "Help me lead well," he murmured. "Help me stay small enough to learn." Humility, he had come to understand, wasn't weakness. It was discernment, the ability to recognize what was his to carry and what was not. True leadership, especially in places no one applauded, required emotional maturity. It demanded the courage to act responsibly without needing to be seen. Margaret supported that vision without trying to reshape it. She believed in stewardship more than speed. Together, they agreed the farm didn't need to impress anyone. It needed to endure. Grace, the mule, fit naturally into that dream. She was no longer young, but she embodied consistency. Thomas adjusted the plow carefully, mindful of her pace. Strategic thinking wasn't about pushing harder, it was about knowing when to slow down. As they worked, Thomas felt something settle within him. Focus returned, not sharp, but steady. The discipline of routine aligned once again with direction. Purpose felt anchored, not ambitious, but rooted. Later that afternoon, he stood by the still water at the far edge of the property, watching the reflection of the sky. Peace arrived without announcement. Insight often did. He didn't know how or when trials would come. He only knew that leadership built on humility could withstand them. At least, that was what he believed, before winter arrived. Winter came early that year, without ceremony. The soil hardened before Thomas was ready. Frozen ground resisted the plow, and each step felt heavier than the last. Discipline remained. He still rose before dawn, still followed the rhythm he trusted, but direction began to blur. Effort alone no longer produced peace. Grace struggled more than usual. Her breath steamed sharply in the cold, and the rope dragged slightly behind her, carving an uneven line in the frost. Thomas noticed, but told himself it was only the season. Everyone slowed in winter. That was reasonable. That was manageable. Yet something inside him began to fracture quietly. Fatigue settled deeper each week, not the kind cured by rest, but the kind that eroded inner strength. His long-term vision dimmed beneath the weight of unspoken doubt. He worked harder, believing discipline could substitute for clarity, but discipline was no longer enough without direction. The wind shifted often, sharp and restless, rattling loose boards along the barn. Thomas felt it even when indoors. It carried uncertainty, subtle, persistent. He found himself gripping the fence posts longer during repairs, as if boundaries alone could hold everything together. Margaret sensed the change again. "You don't have to carry it all in silence," she said one evening as they patched a torn glove together. Her voice was gentle, grounded. "I know," Thomas replied. Though the words lacked conviction, leadership sometimes tempted him into isolation. Responsibility had a way of convincing a man that asking for help was a failure of character. One morning, Grace stumbled, not badly, just enough to stop Thomas mid-step. He placed a steadying hand against her flank, feeling the tremor beneath the hide. Frozen soil had no mercy, neither did pride. Still, he pushed forward. The broken section of fence near the east pasture went unrepaired longer than it should have. Thomas noticed it each day, the wire sagging, the post leaning. Integrity, he told himself, wasn't undone by a delay. But something about leaving it that way unsettled him. At night, clarity slipped like mist, retreating from light. His prayers grew shorter, not out of distance but exhaustion. He was not angry, he was simply worn, and weariness, left unattended, has a way of preparing the ground for deeper trials. The first real storm came just after Thanksgiving. It was nothing extraordinary by itself. Snow, wind, and an unusually heavy frost that lingered for days. But to Thomas, it felt like a warning. The farm, already thin from the strain of a hard season, seemed to buckle under the weight of it. He woke in the dead of night to hear the wind shrieking through the trees. Grace's low whine echoed from the barn, distant but desperate. He rushed outside, pulling on his coat in the freezing darkness. The snow was thick, but not enough to stop him from stumbling toward the barn, heart thumping in his chest. He knew something was wrong. Inside the barn, Grace was lying flat on the ground, her legs stiff, her breathing shallow. A quick glance showed him the problem. One of her legs was injured, twisted beneath her body. She was trying to rise but couldn't, her pain sharp and visible in every labored breath. Thomas dropped to his knees beside her. His hands trembled as he reached out, trying to comfort her. She was no longer the strong, steady animal who had always pulled his plow. She was old now, her body worn and fragile, and the injury had pushed her to her limit. "Come on, Grace," Thomas whispered through clenched teeth, his voice low, strained. "Come on, please." The clock ticked loudly in his mind. He had to act fast, but he didn't know what to do. The storm outside seemed to press in from every side, a cruel reminder that the elements had no mercy. He tried to lift her, but the pain in her leg kept her from standing. Grace gave a soft whimper, her eyes full of something Thomas couldn't name, something that made his chest tighten with guilt. He knew what needed to be done. The thought of it stung like cold steel. He had known for years that Grace wouldn't last forever. He had prepared himself for the day when they would part ways, when he would have to put his animal down. But now, standing there with her warmth fading and the wind howling in the distance, it felt as if the world was rushing at him too fast. The decision needed to be made, but not like this, not in the middle of a storm. The cold seeped deeper into his bones, but it wasn't the cold that made his hands shake. It was the weight of the responsibility that felt heavier than the snow. "Help me, Lord," he murmured under his breath. "Please." But in the silence that followed, the answer was clear. There was no easy way out. Grace needed him to make the hard choice. Thomas sat beside her for a long while, holding her gently, feeling her breathe more steadily as he stroked her fur. The snow piled higher against the barn door, the storm howling outside. But in that small, dim space, it was as though everything else faded, leaving only the quiet bond between man and animal. At dawn, with the storm still raging, Thomas made the call. It wasn't the end he wanted for her. It wasn't the end he had imagined for himself either. But sometimes responsibility didn't come with clear answers. It came with hard choices that shaped the man who made them. As he led Grace to the quiet place by the oak tree, the storm began to ease, as if nature itself had accepted the burden. He had to let go. And in that letting go, he would learn something vital about leadership, about grace, and about humility. It wasn't about saving face or standing tall. It was about doing what was right, even when it was hard, even when it hurt. And so, under the winter sky, Thomas did what needed to be done. The storm passed, and in the silence that followed, Thomas understood something he had long forgotten. Sometimes, humility didn't shine in the way others could see. It didn't have to sparkle or stand out. It simply had to be. The days that followed were quieter, colder, and longer than Thomas had expected. The storm had come and gone, leaving behind an eerie stillness. Grace was gone, and though he had known it was the right thing to do, the weight of the decision hung over him like a shadow. His work still needed to be done, the fence posts still needed repairing, the feed still needed to be collected, but nothing felt the same. Every step, every task seemed smaller, quieter, as if the farm itself was mourning. Margaret noticed the change in him. He spent more time inside, his boots left untouched by the door. He spoke less, though his silence wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the kind that settled deep in the bones, the kind that followed a wound not easily healed. One afternoon, after a long stretch of endless chores, Margaret set a steaming cup of coffee in front of him at the kitchen table. He hadn't asked for it, but it was just what he needed. As she sat across from him, her gaze soft but steady, she didn't ask how he was. She already knew. "You did what you had to," she said simply, her hands folded in her lap. "I know," Thomas replied, his voice hoarse, "but I don't feel like I did it right." Margaret nodded slowly, understanding the unspoken words that followed. It wasn't just the mule. It was the loss. It was the weight of making decisions that never felt quite right. The silence stretched, but Margaret didn't push. She waited. When Thomas finally spoke again, it was as though he had been carrying something too heavy to name. "It's not just her," he said quietly. "I don't know if I've been leading this farm well anymore. I don't know if I've been leading us well." Margaret reached across the table, her fingers brushing his hand. "You've been steady," she said. "You've been here, even when it's hard, even when it's lonely. That's leadership, Thomas." Thomas shook his head slowly. "It feels like I've been pretending to be strong. I thought that was what I needed to be. But now, I'm not so sure." Margaret's eyes softened with understanding. "Strength isn't just in what we show. It's in what we carry, quietly, humbly, when no one else can see." The words lingered, taking root in a place Thomas hadn't realized was so raw. He had always prided himself on his strength, on his ability to push through, to hold everything together. But what if true strength wasn't in holding on? What if it was in knowing when to let go? For the first time in a long while, Thomas felt a flicker of something inside him, a quiet insight. He had been thinking of leadership as something rigid, something to prove. But now he understood. True leadership was knowing how to bend without breaking. It was about being steady without being unyielding. It was about leading with humility, not authority. The days that followed were not marked by dramatic change. There was no grand shift, no sudden burst of clarity. But slowly, gently, the rhythm returned. Thomas began to find a new kind of peace. Not the kind of peace born from control or certainty, but the peace that comes from surrender. The peace that comes from allowing things to unfold in their own time without forcing them. Margaret was right. Leadership, he realized, wasn't about pretending to have all the answers. It was about knowing that you didn't have to. And in that humility, in that quiet strength, he found his way again. The farm didn't need to shine. It didn't need to be perfect. It needed to endure, to hold its ground in the face of winter storms and heartache. And as long as Thomas was there, learning, leading, letting go, so would it. Christmas arrived, quieter than most years, but perhaps more meaningful. The snow had settled, thick and soft, covering the fields like a blanket. The house was warm, lights flickering gently on the tree that Margaret had carefully decorated. The farmhouse, with its steady glow, felt like a haven, a place where imperfection was accepted, and love, in all its quiet forms, was enough. That evening, as they sat down to a modest dinner, Thomas looked out the window at the barn. The light from the farmhouse fell across the snow, casting long shadows. He could see the faint outline of the path leading toward the oak tree, the one his father had planted so many years ago. It stood tall against the sky, its branches reaching upward despite the weight of the snow. Thomas felt a quiet stirring within him. The path was still there, just as it had always been. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't always clear, but it was still leading somewhere worth going. He turned to Margaret, her face soft in the dim light. She smiled at him, her eyes knowing, as though she understood the quiet shift inside him. "I think I've finally understood," he said, his voice steady. "Humility doesn't need to be loud to be seen. It doesn't need to shine like Christmas lights. It simply needs to be present, steady, honest." Margaret nodded, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. And in that moment, Thomas realized something more than just the lesson of the farm. He understood that humility, when it is truly lived, doesn't need to be noticed to make a difference. It simply makes the world around it feel more real, more true. And in that truth, a quiet light shone brighter than any Christmas decoration could ever do. The storm had passed, and in the stillness that followed, Thomas found his peace. Humility is never the brightest thing in the room, yet it is what gives meaning to everything that remains when the lights go out. What shines loudly may impress for a season, but what is built quietly carries weight across a lifetime. Character does not announce itself, it endures. True leadership is not revealed through recognition or applause, but through the willingness to accept responsibility without bitterness. A man grows not by proving his strength, but by submitting his pride to wisdom. Integrity often costs more than convenience ever could, yet it is the only currency that holds value when circumstances turn cold. Those who choose humility walk a slower path, but it is a path with direction. They learn discernment where others seek shortcuts. They gain clarity where others demand control. And in that steady obedience, inner strength is formed, layer by layer, season by season. Often, God does his deepest work in silence. He shapes a man long before he elevates him and strengthens his roots before allowing his branches to be seen. Because what is built with humility will stand when every borrowed light has faded. Some lessons do not arrive loudly. They settle in the heart, the way winter light rests on a quiet field. If this story reminded you that true strength is formed in humility, then you are already walking a deeper path than you realize. There are more stories like this. Stories about leadership tested in silence, purpose shaped through responsibility, and clarity found when a man chooses integrity over appearance. These are not tales of perfection, but of steady transformation and inner strength built over time. If you are searching for direction, long-term vision, and wisdom that endures beyond seasons, subscribe to this channel and continue this journey with us. What you watch next will take this lesson further, into another moment where character is refined and where God's timing once again proves faithful.